My name is Walter Link. I want to introduce a webinar today on the future of ESG finance, investing, and banking. It's a preparation for our Future Economy Forum event series and preparation of COP and during COP in November in Egypt. And one of the key topics that we will be exploring there is exactly this whole question of the new future-oriented finance. And I'm very happy to have dear friends and colleagues with me on the call who are experts in this field. And so I would like to welcome them into the screen now. So firstly, I want to introduce Marilou, who is a pioneer in the sustainable ESG investment field. For decades, developing and leading one of Europe's finest ESG investment institutions, Triodos Investment Management, that you chaired the board of. And besides that, she has done many other important things, including being involved in banking finance, microfinance around the world, and also in the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, which in over 40 countries brings together institutions that are at the cutting edge of a new way of banking, and it turns out a way of banking that is financially more successful than conventional banking, and debunking the idea that somehow being good and doing the right thing is bad for business. And I think that's the key point that we are making here with this Future Economy Forum and with all the participants. And so it's also a great pleasure to introduce Helmy Abouleish, who is still in a car and will soon also join us nevertheless. And he is the leader of Sekem, one of the most important examples of sustainable development in the global south in Egypt. And in the finance sector, for example, he's just developing with the Cairo Stock Exchange and the Ministry of Agriculture a carbon credit scheme that has the potential of transitioning thousands of farmers from conventional farming to regenerative farming, which of course has a very positive impact on carbon sequestration and many other topics. And he will surely talk about that. And then certainly I also want to introduce Peter Blom. And Peter was for a long time the CEO of Triodos Bank, which was again this pioneering institution, Europe's leading sustainability bank. Then also helped with the development of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, is a member of the supervisory board of the Dutch Central Bank, a chair of the Sustainability Finance Lab, and other important innovative institutions in the finance, banking, and investment field. So I would like to start, Marilou, with you and ask you to tell us about this amazing growth that we have seen in ESG investment and related activities that is driving support for a future economy. What do you see is happening there so far, and how do you see it developing further?
Yeah, thank you, Walter. And let me actually first distinguish between ESG investing and impact investing, because I actually think that impact investing, investing with the intention to solve societal challenges, to invest with positive social or environmental impact, is actually more of a driving force, I would say, for what we're discussing here than ESG investing as such. ESG investing is, you could say, more about preventing certain damages being done. So actually impact investing is more of the driving force for positive change. So you see that, let's say, increasing enormously as well over all kinds of asset classes. So it's not only in direct private investments, but also investments listed on the stock exchange. But the whole idea that you invest because you want to have a positive contribution, that's going to be crucial. And I think what is also important is that we also want to change the financial systems that we're working in, and that's actually also a driving force within impact investing, because the way our financial systems work at the moment, where it's much more about extracting value instead of creating value, and that's something that definitely needs to change. And in that respect, I would say ESG investing is more about taking very slow steps within the current financial system, and impact investing is much more about radically changing the financial system, which I think is what we are needing. So maybe that as a start.
And let me follow up with a concern that I think many of us have, and that is also more and more in the public sphere, that ESG investing is often distorted as like some kind of greenwashing.
Yeah.
And maybe you can say something about what can be done to prevent the greenwashing. And you were also the chair of the board of the B Corp movement and the B Lab in Europe that has very clear measurement criteria for what is a company that works for positive impact. And of course, there are many other things happening around the world to kind of address this issue of measurement and also greenwashing. Please give us some of your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and as you say, I think the B Corps are leading the way in that respect. But what's also interesting is, for example, upcoming regulations within the European Union. So one of them is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And this actually requires companies to very clearly demonstrate their two things: their effects on society, so on the environment and on people. And also, let's say, to explain what's happening in the environment, how that interacts with their business. So this is actually a directive that's going to help in preventing the greenwashing, so to say, because it's quite strict, and it's going to apply to roughly 50,000 companies within the European Union. So this will set a standard as well. But I think it's still very important what happens within the B Corp community, because these are actually the companies that are leading the way on a number of issues. But these European regulations, so this is one is for companies, then there is the other one for investors, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. And that's also requiring financial institutions to disclose much more about their criteria on sustainability and how they use that for investing in companies. So these are all good developments leading in the right direction, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Helmy, in the global south, there is a great need, of course, also for finance to flow into the direction of sustainable development, both economic and social development. And you have been developing this, groundbreaking for Egypt initiative to encourage farmers that at the moment are using conventional farming methodologies to shift into regenerative farming via a carbon credit scheme that you are developing with the Cairo Stock Exchange. Tell us a little bit about the scheme and also what it will do for farmers and other business people in Egypt.
Dear Walter, I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm sorry that I'm still caught in the traffic here in Cairo, but I wanted just to say that, first of all, I, besides having created this agricultural carbon credit scheme, which helps us to fund and finance the conversion from conventional farming to organic farming, and not only help us fund the conversion, but improving the livelihoods of these farmers who are using the agricultural carbon credits as an additional income stream for their ecosystem services.
I think we are going to maybe switch, Peter, to you for a moment. And so you, of course, with Triodos Bank at the time, have been involved in all of these different impact activities, because as a banker, you were supporting companies in all kinds of industries that were moving towards sustainability, regeneration, the future of the economy. And I think you always had a very clear image of the role of banks. And now in your role with the central bank, but also with other institutions, you can further develop in a way this perspective on a larger systems level. Tell us about how is banking needing to develop an additional to investing to drive the economy forward?
I believe for a long time, bankers considered themselves as operating a quite technical performance within goals set by governments. So the environmental policies were of no concern of the banks, and also not of central banks, because that was a political government thing. And if the government sets rules, then the banks could operate in that context. I think what you have seen in the last 5 to 10 years, that there is more consciousness around the interaction between different players in society, different stakeholders, and that there is also expected from the financial sector, particularly since the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, that they also play their own role and have a responsibility themselves. And what you see happening at the moment is that particularly also central banks realize that price stability and financial stability, what is their main objective to preserve that, is highly dependent on what is happening in the environment and in climate questions, but also broader social questions in the sustainable sphere. So they can really broaden their scope more and say, well, what can we do in helping the financial system to address these issues, these climate issues, these social issues, so we also get a better and stable economic realm. And I think that's an important entry point for central banks. And of course, for us as the front runners in sustainable finance, it starts with sustainability. But I think from the mainstream financial sector, they start to angle it much more from a risk perspective, from a system perspective, but start to realize this is really part of their role in society and playing that stronger and stronger. So I'm very positive about it, and I think there is still a long way to go, but it's going in the right direction. Just to give you one example, I was 2 days ago in a conference of European and actually global central bankers about biodiversity and central banking. So even the topic of biodiversity, what is not so easy to grasp in financial terms and stability terms, was picked up and seen as a highly important aspect of economic stability, and therefore also concern of central banks. So I do feel that the integrated approach has become much more important in the last years, and I would even say the last 1 or 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned already, you've been a co-founder of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. And that is really this global institution in 44 countries that has this perspective. Can you tell us more about that institution or that network, and maybe some of the partners there that advance this whole movement also in the Global South?
Yeah, it was founded 12, 13 years ago now, and it was very much a movement where we felt it's a global movement. It's a movement of banks, and we wanted to particularly be a platform for CEOs of banks or executive board members to have an exchange of information, exchange of experience. And what struck me most is that there was a very positive exchange between more experience with social questions in the South, much more than in the North. And the North could really learn from there, and more the environmental, the specific environmental green financing in the North. And I think all members started to realize that this was actually something what belongs together. You cannot separate climate issues, green issues from social issues. And therefore, the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, and what we really mean by that is human values, more integrated human values, became a really had a bonding effect on all the CEOs. And with all these banks coming together from, as you said, more than 40 countries, the CEO really felt connected through these human values and wanted to be their banks in service of those human values. Very different starting points for those banks. Some had millions of customers, others had only 20 or 30,000, but they all came from that background, and we're very happy to be this global movement.
And this, I think there was a research done that also demonstrated the financial success of these banks in comparison to conventional banks, which may be surprising to some.
Yeah, I think the most interesting number I found was that a much bigger part of the balance sheet of those banks was really invested in the real economy. With mainstream banks, it's between 30 and 40%, and with the Global Alliance banks, it was more 70 to 80%. So you could really see the involvement in the real economy, in the real concerns of people and businesses was much bigger in these banks. At the same time, they had comparable solvency numbers, so the capital was very healthy, a little bit higher than mainstream, and also the profitability was in line with mainstream. Sometimes a little bit higher, but that was not significant. But I think the most significant number was the strong involvement in the real economy. And that shows really the focus on servicing business and people and not servicing money for money. I think that was a very important outcome of that study, what has been updated since the start of the Global Alliance.
Yeah. So, Helmy, this brings us back to you. I hope you can hear us now. Can you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
So you, of course, are the real economy, and you are also the real values, since you are serving so many people in Egypt, not only directly through your companies and your education and social activities, but also as a model for a new economy, for a new way of doing business and other activities. So tell us a little bit more. You were interrupted before about this activity you're doing with the government and the stock exchange, but also how impact really translates to the grassroots, how this financial support and system trickles down to the day-to-day life of the people in Egypt.
Let me first of all say that I think I'm one of the examples, beneficiaries of impact investment Marilou mentioned. I represent the Sekem initiative, which wouldn't be around today in this call without some few banks in the early 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on.
We cannot hear you.
I don't know from where this background noise comes, not from me anyhow, but I want to say this is the one thing. So impact finance, without it, an initiative like Sekem would not be there. What does it mean? It means that we need to recognize that the needs of such initiatives, which work on the holistic, on all four dimensions, are different from many other companies and need to be studied and recognized in a different way. And the other thing I want to say is that until now, it's not easy for us, even for us or for others, to get funding for the right things in the financial world, to get funding to go to organic farming or more sustainable energy management or things like this, which has many different reasons, I think. But one is also that the financial sector is not yet looking enough and including enough the economic, ecological, cultural, and social dimension as a holistic set of criteria. And so we are still having difficulties to find banks in our region which would honor all kinds of other results of our institutions, initiatives, and farmers. This is the one thing, and this is why the agricultural carbon credits, I think, are just a good tool to help us visualize these additional benefits, ecosystem services our farmers are doing through certificates which they can trade. And still, when we do this, we need partners, financial partners who pre-finance the conversion, which is 1.5 to 2 years. And when we speak about 40,000 farmers, we need to fund 40 million euros. And from the other side, we need partners to fund working capital and assets and investments and all kinds of other things. So what I want to say is the agricultural carbon credits is a perfect idea to help farmers to convert, but it can only succeed with the support of partners from the financial sector. And this can be manifold, of course, and they can be giving loans and equity and so on. So I want to say I'm very happy that we have this tool out now, but I'm looking very much forward to discussions during the Future Economy Forum with my friends and with Peter and Marilou and others to see how we can really make this wonderful example also working and workable for banks as well as for farmers and business associations.
Yeah, and I think it's of course important to mention that regenerative agriculture, since we are doing this in the context of COP, is one of the most promising climate solutions because it has the potential to sequester enormous amounts of carbon and to actually undo a lot of the damage that has been done over the past hundreds of years and especially the past decades. And so financing the transition to a new agriculture is of particular importance. And so Marilou or Peter, what do you see is the possibility not only in this particular instance in Egypt, but around the world to finance these transitions that are necessary to regenerate the climate again?
Yeah, I would say one of the challenges that we face is that, let's say, the value that's being created, the value Helmy is talking about, the social, cultural, and specifically the environmental value that's being created by regenerative farming is not translated into financial terms yet. And for me, it's a big question how we can do that. So I'm quite excited to hear more about what you're describing, Helmy, with the carbon credits. But I think we also need to look at other possibilities because I think this value is being recognized more and more, but it's not yet linked to any financial value. And for me, the question is it about monetizing these specific values, cultural, social, environmental, or can we find other ways to involve the private sector? And in my opinion, we should do that in a sort of combination with support from government, because these are all values that are absolutely essential for the future that we want. So this is I would say the commons that we need. So I think there is a role for government, but in relation to the private sector. But this is the kind of discussions I hope we will have when we come together in Cairo, because it needs a lot of creativity to find new ways, new instruments to make this happen. I think we all are very much aware that it needs to happen, but the how and needs the creativity from all of us, not only the bankers but and the investors. But it's I'm dealing with this reforestation in a number of ways, talking about not only regenerative agriculture but also reforestation. So everything that has to do with value being created really for the long term, not leading to immediate financial returns. It needs to happen, but we need to find and create instruments to make it happen. So
I mean, that's exactly the point of bringing all of you together in Cairo and in Sekem and COP. To have these talks, and we will bring actually a number of the leading regenerative agriculture leaders from around the world. And what they're actually finding out is that regenerative farming is either more productive or as productive as conventional farming. And therefore, just from a financial perspective, can already equally or outperform, similar maybe to the banks that you were talking about in the Global Alliance. So it produces all these social and environmental values, but also more and more financial values. But there is, I think, this big transition that is needed, right? So it's such a big step to go from what you did in the past, what you know, to doing things differently, even though they work better, right? So, Peter, you've been working in this systems change, right? And also with your involvement in the Club of Rome and the systems thinking institutions. What do you see is possible and needed to bring about actually the large scaling of these very successful models of doing business and economy and banking differently?
Well, I think to a certain extent, the banking can do it themselves. They can, for simply business and risk management reasons, they can say we have to focus on businesses who include this environmental sustainable value. But I think we also have to move to another system where what are now externalities are properly monetized. So on a much bigger scale, we can move in that direction. And I think on the one end, you can sort of reward certain eco services, as Helmy was given. And I think for a bank, it's very important that governments say, well, we make sure that these mechanisms will be in place. You can do it to a certain extent as a private initiative, but in the end, it has to be simply a sort of tax system or or subsidy system, or actually it's more transactional. You offer something as a farmer, as an organic farmer for society, and you want to be paid for that because there's an effort there, and many benefit from it, and the government represents all those people who benefit from it. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we have to price properly economic operations, and maybe we have to do it through tax, who are actually using some of the environmental space what is there. So I think it's a matter of paying correctly what is supporting the system and taxing also in the right way what is really giving damage to the system. And then we move, hopefully, the market and the incentives in the right direction. And in that, banks can play quite an important role by making sure that with these incentives, proper markets will be created. And farmers, like Helmy's example, can really sell their carbon credits, for example, to markets, and can earn an income from that. So I do feel that is the role banks can play. The banks themselves cannot change the whole system. The system is really something where governments have to come in. Only banks like value-based banks can sort of act as a front runner and show that it is in principle possible, but it's very hard to scale up in the way that everybody gets involved. So it's quite it's a way of dancing between government and business and civil society. Will have to move in a certain direction, I would say. I can't hear you, Walter.
Helmy, back to you. What is the perspective that you have in evolving, an economy, a big economy like the Egyptian one in the global south? What is necessary for business and other leaders to take these steps into the direction of regeneration, positive impact, combined with their day-to-day business activities?
I would say, from my experience now in the field Sekem is active in, and in this particular in the agricultural field, which is very, very important, there are two things. The one is that we learned a lot through full or through cost accounting about what is the real price of things and services. And I think this is something which we have to teach in our universities and schools and accounting firms and auditing firms and banks and everywhere, to get an idea what is the real price of the products and services we are consuming. And I think this is a more research and scientific background information, but it's important to know, because then the illusions fall away. The illusion that organic is more expensive than conventional, and many, many other illusions. Renewable energy is more expensive than fossil fuel energy, and so on. So this is a good background. And then, indeed, as I said, and as Peter also mentioned, and we are starting to do this in the meantime also for biodiversity and many other dimensions now, how can we monetize additional services? Making products more expensive, making the polluter pay, which would be another possibility, as Peter mentioned, is as good. But unfortunately, politicians in our country and many other countries in Europe and the world will not like to increase food prices by their decisions. This is a reality which we have to face. So what we have to make the organic products cheaper, and this we can. And I think that the carbon credits, where the carbon market is huge, the volumes are going up, the values are going up. It's a nice starting and entry point to monetize ecosystem services which are not in the price of the product. And basically, by paying to an agricultural initiative or farmer in Egypt a price for his potatoes and the price for his carbon credits, enables him to sell the potatoes, which are Demeter or organic, in the conventional market for the conventional price, because he then gets the premium from the carbon credits and he doesn't need to add it to the price, and doesn't make food more expensive. So this is the nice thing about monetizing these externalities. And I don't know if it's the only thing. I think there will be more externalities monetized in the future. And I think over the long term, there will be also other mechanisms. So this is the one thing. And the other thing which I want to say, and I want to really highlight this, what we have now in the making, going from 2,000 farmers to 40,000 farmers, has already a huge possibility for upscaling and mainstreaming organic farming in Egypt. By going to 40,000 farmers, we will go to 250,000 hectares. We are going to about 5 to 10% area. We go to 1.5 million tons of CO2 emissions, which we can reduce, or we can even sequester. And so I think what we need now to think about is how can we build the capacity to make such a transformation? How can we get the right funding partners to make such a transformation? How do we get the right lobbying power and governance structures in place for the carbon credits? But I sense from all the experience of the last 1 and 2 years I had now going around to different forums, that the market for carbon credits, the demand for this service is increasing and the prices are going up. And so I see the potential for a real upscaling, for really reaching out to the critical mass. And then the final point will be, is all this going to be economically viable? And I think your question to Peter was, are the banks which work on values and other criteria, are they in their performance indicators better economically, outperforming those who don't? My experience in our fields, yes, we are doing better than conventional industry competitors. And I think even for agriculture, this will work as soon as this agricultural carbon market is established. And I'm then also very much looking forward to see the same happening for services. And we are experimenting this today for medical insurance. We are experimenting it for waste management. And in our own...
Maybe I can add, Walter, now we lost Helmy for a minute, is that I think it does not only work with rewarding positive contributions, it's also making damages to the system more expensive.
Yeah.
And we don't have that in the current system. We love greening and we even want to support it, but we also have to come in more and more and say, well, the real cost, the true cost of polluting, of not social activities should also come into the system. So it has to go two ways. Otherwise, I believe that it will remain a very small, small part of the market who will change. And I think the combination will probably make it mainstream, because they really get the true price for a much bigger group of people feasible.
Yeah, I think that is the key, right? We have for decades now grown in the margins, right? And we have created out of nothing 30 years ago, 40 years ago, a large movement. But now it's time to move towards becoming the new mainstream. And in a way, anything less is not enough. And it seems incredibly ambitious at this time. But I think when we look back, where we were 30 years ago when we started doing a lot of this stuff, and we see the trajectory, we can maybe be hopeful to see that the situation now is so pressing that we need to move into becoming the new mainstream. And that, of course, has a lot to do with future generations. And so Helmy, you also are, founded a university that has now 3,000 students, the largest sustainable development university in the MENA region. and you are therefore directly interacting with the younger generation. And also, just to say this, the last 5 minutes. So I think a short comment about how our younger generations are responding to these challenges and these new opportunities that in a way we are also offering.
My experience from Heliopolis University and from our students, from those with whom I work and those whom I meet on our campus, is that their questions about the future, their questions about the future and about the connection of the future and sustainable development are getting louder and louder, clearer and clearer, and they are seeing it with their own eyes more and more every day. And so I see, and this is not only in our university, I have to say, this is also happening in other universities, public and private universities in Egypt and in the whole region. I think the next generation is recognizing that the system change is approaching, that the challenges are huge, that we cannot, with the same way we have created the problems, find the solutions. And they are searching, and they need to get the tools, they need to get the education, they need to unfold their potential to be able to handle these challenges. But I see an interest, an awakening, and I'm very hopeful and optimistic when I see the students. And the interesting thing is that such an event like COP27 as an event has really also a catalytic effect on this whole question in the Egyptian society. Today, I hope in our call, but also in our one-to-one discussions, Egyptian banks are starting to footprint, to ask the questions, to integrate, to work, and to understand that there's another new dimension out there. Egyptian businessmen are now getting committed to do something against this issue, which was not on their agenda 1, 2, 3 years ago. And so I think these challenges, which we all see every day, together with the youth asking the right questions to their parents, is making the change more and more visible every day.
Well, we are coming to the end of our meeting. I think we have only started the conversation, but of course that's the point. We just wanted to give a little bit of flavor of the kind of conversations that we can have together in Egypt. I think it's so important, that we are present at COP. We all know it can be a frustrating process, like many of these global processes, but I don't think we can afford to pull back from it. And, it's an absolutely necessary trip, I think, to go there and to be present and to be counted and to bring forward a voice for a future economy, because mostly the voices that are influencing policymakers around the world are supporting the old economy. And so we need to be there and bring our voices in and these increasingly available models of not only positive impact on nature and society, but also positive business impact. And I think that these dialogues with all the business leaders and investors and other leaders in Egypt that come from different parts of the world, could have effects that we can't even foresee yet, because it's not often in the big presentations, but it's in the dinner conversation. It's in that one example that you give and the one connection that you make that something moves. And so this is what we really want to support with these events, with 20, it was 14 days of events in Sekem, then in Cairo, and then in COP, and we hope that you will join us and also join us next Monday, 4 o'clock European Central Time, when we have a conversation with equally interesting people about regenerative agriculture. So thank you very much, everybody, and I hope to see you in Cairo and anywhere else around the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you, Cairo.